In the next 20 minutes, we're going to introduce to you an entirely new way to look at residential land development called Prefurbia. When we look at sustainable development, we look at economics, how we can raise value, lower construction costs, lower outgoing maintenance. And then we look at the human factors. It's great if everybody could live in a gentrified, expensive neighborhood, but how can we create a self-worth at the lower or middle income levels so that every time you come into your development you feel great about yourself? And of course, reducing environmental impacts are important, but not at the expense of profitability, because if a developer goes broke trying to be environmentally responsible, it will not be repeated in the industry. And that's why over 20 years you see very little of it. A balanced approach is what will give sustainable growth. So how do we accomplish that when the world is developed like this? So we have to understand why the world is developed with almost no design sense. We can look at the zoning requirements. All we have is a set of minimums, and maybe we've thrown in a few of the maximums. So there are a set of rules, paint by numbers, on how we develop the land that we have today. Meanwhile, the developer always gets the blame for the cookie-cutter development, and yet the developer never designs the site. It's the consultants who do this work by following the city's rules. We've been developing software since 1976. We're one of the leading software companies for engineering and surveying. And we began to realize that software has been part of the problem that's been used for land development design purposes. To explain a little bit further, in 1976 when we began, the Cray 1 was the world's most powerful computer. Today's iPhone is multiple times faster with 1,000 times more memory. So you got to ask yourself, with all this power today, why do we still design like this? Why do professional consultants who get paid heavily to design our neighborhoods still do work like this? And that's because they're using software that's been designed only about speed. It's been taking these minimums and how fast can we get that development out. Software has always been packaged and marketed to go faster, not better. Following a set of minimums encourages a tight grid. Natural terrain is never a tight grid. It's free form. So we've created a new era of design where we can embrace the natural terrain, create beautiful, wonderful neighborhoods that honor Mother Nature. Also, everybody wants a view, and hardly anybody wants to be packaged in a dense development. How do we provide a sense of space for everyone at every income so that every person feels important? Plus, what we represent on plan really should be what is exactly what was built. And that's rarely the case in land development. An entirely new systems approach to how architecture relates to land planning is introduced in Prefurbia. This has a significant increase in value and livability that has not been duplicated before. It's a foundation for a new way to look at how homes, open space, interior space relates to each other. And you'll see how that works soon. Prefurbia also introduces new paradigms in walkability. In other words, we again look at systems approach to create neighborhoods that invite a stroll over a drive. These systems can be used not just for new suburban development, but also, as shown here, urban redevelopment. Imagine neighborhoods that are so connected that you'll actually want to go out and make an experience for a stroll. In Prefurbia, we've introduced vehicular flow. What does that mean? As you enter the neighborhood, we maintain a constant rate of speed, which significantly reduces both time and energy as one traverses the neighborhood. Why should developers care about sustainable growth? Let's just take a look at one home in this 100 lot phase 1. The streets and lots will set a standard for centuries, even though homes might get remodeled. Average family is 3.5 people. So when we take a look at the, say, 2 centuries, this 100 lot phase will affect almost 12,000 people. And yet, with all of our technology, this is what's being very commonplace design in development throughout the U.S. A grid development is wrongly thought to be pedestrian friendly. In this case, this gridded development, you have to get to that corner. So for most people, the grid provides the longest, not the shortest distance to get to your destination. So again, in Prefurbia, what we do is we use a systems approach. So instead of having the street system being the pedestrian system, what we do is we look for the destinations and we design the pedestrian system first. The main trails come first in Prefurbia, and then we design around it. A much more logical approach to planning if we're going to create pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods. Traffic engineering's done a great job on arterial streets and highways, but what about local streets? We started researching how much time and energy it actually takes a vehicle to get to residential speeds. Well, it's 200 feet to get a car to that normal residential speed. Then you're very efficient in time and energy, but you're going to have to eventually come to a stop. That's another 200 feet soccer mom driving. So a flow cycle's a minimum of 400 feet. This has a significant impact on both time and energy while in a neighborhood. To further demonstrate why this is important for every development that's being built, let's take a look at this development that was approved in 2010. It's assumed that the grid is very efficient. However, if you live in most of the homes in this neighborhood, you cannot turn a corner at 30 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour. It's in fact incredibly inefficient in both time and energy, and yet this plan provides very few premium settings for the builders and the developers. As we redesign the neighborhood, the same neighborhood, we're looking for a one main street to define the neighborhood that maintains flow. There's a significant reduction in average time and energy that goes through this development compared to all other forms of planning. Perhaps what is just as, if not more important than the time and energy savings in this neighborhood is the fact that we have been able to reduce the street length by 33% while increasing the home premiums, and yet it's the same density. So this is some of the things that we're introducing that all tie together. Looking at the original grid plan, every one of those circles is a conflict point, not just for vehicles, but you're crossing pedestrians at every one of those intersections. The prior new urbanism regulations required us to bisect the neighborhood by having two main streets going through the design. This created 4 distinct separate neighborhoods. However, the circular walk binds them all together. So with this concept of flow, once you enter one of these 4 neighborhoods, you maintain a good sense of flow. And that is the foundation behind the planning of Prefurbia. That's how this plan and the logic of this plan has been developed. Those are big scale concepts. Now we're going to get in the fine details that we've been using on most of the 900 Prefurbia neighborhoods that we've designed in the last 25 years. We invented this technique called coving. Before coving, the engineer or surveyor laying out the subdivisions would have to try and squeeze every lot in every little corner. Coving does something that's very unnatural. It pulls away from the boundaries. In this case, we're able to save 42% of the street, make 40% larger lots with 2 less lots, essentially the same density. And again, it's very important that what we represent on plan gets built identical to the way we're representing. A minimums approach is why those $40,000 bubbles are created. In order to stretch the setback line, you have to parallel that road because of the minimums. 20-foot front yard minimum means that we have to build that pavement, but the word minimum's key. We can go beyond the minimums, creating these little green open spaces, or large green open space in many cases, that we call a cove. That's the logic behind coving. Another example is in a cul-de-sac. By looking at a standard cul-de-sac on the left, the only logic is the fire engine radius. By going beyond every minimum, we double the amount of cul-de-sac lots, and yet it's the same density with far less pavement. So we've made a bad situation better. You can use that island that we've gained in the middle for a park, or you could drain to the middle, have one inlet, and use it for your low impact design, your environmentally friendly cul-de-sac. And we could take the walk and extend it through the rest of the neighborhood so it's no longer closed. So what we've done is taking something that has a lot of negatives and turn it into a whole group of new positives. All we did was we exceeded the minimums which is allowed by every ordinance. By breaking the rigid relationship of home and street, we can start sculpting our neighborhoods to create exciting developments that have less or eliminate the negatives of a traditional neighborhood. There's only so much space we have, so the only way this can work is to significantly reduce the length of street. This significantly reduces the length of sewer mains. Prefurbia takes a different look at land use transitions. Most suburban developments puts the cheapest product at the front door. Our front door in this case are those bisecting streets. So what we do is we put the lower price homes on the perimeter, the higher price homes as we go internal to the development along the most traffic streets. This gives a perception that this is a much more higher income neighborhood than it actually is, and the lower income people go through the higher income lots to get home. So they feel better about the neighborhood. But yet, because of the coving and the variation in lot, the distribution of space is spread throughout the neighborhood. In this particular development, we kept the New Urban park distance from the homes, the average homes, but we've significantly increased the space because the street itself will become a park-like space, so everybody lives in the park. Public streets are a main source of environmental impact, and yet compared to the plan before the grid, we have 20% less pavement, even though we've introduced, which we'll explain soon, diffusers. The big thing isn't length of street. We have 38% less street length compared to the grid. At an average of $250 a linear foot per street, this is a significant reduction of construction cost. Plus, every four-way intersection is an accident waiting to happen. Three-ways are a little bit safer. The old plan had 54 intersections, again for pedestrian connectivity, supposedly. Our plan has 18 intersections. And they're mostly three-ways, mostly on the outside of the curve so you don't have to crane your neck. Much safer neighborhood, much more efficient. What's a diffuser? Diffusers are a way to eliminate the need for traffic circles. They maintain flow on the main street, and yet they diffuse traffic. They're also a neighborhood identity to create that all-important sense of place, especially when we start talking about suburban design, which can be fairly mundane. They eliminate the need for traffic circles. Now let's talk about the pedestrian circulatory system, the fine details in Prefurbia. We meander all of our walks, and what that does is allows us to pull them away from the intersection to make it much safer when a pedestrian crosses the street, so we're not crossing where the cars are looking for other cars, not for pedestrians. Wherever there's a main trail crossing a street with traffic, we put diffusers. Nothing spells wake up more than an island in front of you as you're driving. Get off that cell phone and start looking for pedestrians. Pedestrians cross at one-way streets. Very, very safe. This is what a pedestrian diffuser would look like, for example, in this example of Vieira, Florida. The other thing we like to do is when the ground is flat, we like to put a main trail straight through the site. You plant little trees each side. 10, 20 years later, it becomes a beautiful shaded architectural feature that lasts forever. And again, these main trails, those are your main pedestrian highways. Once you get off the main trail and you get on your local streets, those beautiful meandering walks connect to it. Incredibly connective system. It's very important not to have a one-size-fits-all, because that does not work. That's dysfunctional. We size the walk for the traffic. Low traffic streets will put one 5 or 6 foot wide walk one side of the streets. Neighbors are going to cross the street anyhow, regular basis. Why have walks on each side of the street? Typically they're too narrow. People walk the streets. This is an example of Dean Parkway. It's over 100 years old. Look at those beautiful winding 6 foot wide walks. One of the most beautiful areas of the country, and those walks get used. They invite you out for a stroll. In these Prefurbia neighborhoods, the meandering walk, it gives another sense of scale. Those beautiful setbacks are more emphasized when the walk also meanders, so you have an ever-flowing streetscape. Another thing that it does is it pulls the pedestrians away from the streets. We're not pushing the pedestrians into the traffic. So are they in a public use area? That's the big question we're always asked, because they go outside the right-of-way. They are not outside a public use area. They're inside a public use area because we typically write an easement from the edge of the walk, outside the edge of the walk, to the street. That means that we could duplicate that area to also put utilities. That can plummet the amount of utility bends and manholes within a freeform neighborhood, reducing costs even further. Without an industry change, sustainability is a fantasy. Surveyors, engineers, architects, planners never communicate during the most important design phase at the initial planning process. In order to create a sustainable world, we have to tear down these barriers which prevent us from moving forward. We'll introduce to you now how architecturally integrated planning can bring about a new era of sustainable neighborhood design. On the original plan, there's a tremendous amount of homes that look directly into each other's backyards. In the new plan, while we still have homes that look into each other's backyards, they're reduced by a third. When we start looking at architecture in this freeform planning, the view sheds, the views out the windows, front to front, because of the angles, are significantly greater than any other form of planning. This attention to architectural detail allows us to increase not just the front to front views, but the rear to rear views, and then we introduce a new view around the corner of the home to get panoramic views along the edges. So instead of having a plan A on these lots that you choose and it's so disconnected, we start looking at how can we integrate the interior spaces of the home, the living areas of the home where we spend our time, and coordinate that with the open space that we have around that home. And with that, we create an entirely new way to enhance livability. Our first integrated product was a bay home. So instead of looking at a house as a rooftop or a building pad, we start looking at the functionality within the home. These are zero-lot bay homes that allow a private side yard. They're a replacement for townhomes and duplexes. So the interior room functions are very important. People hang around the kitchens. Where's our windows? Can we get a panoramic view so that you're not looking at the neighbor? It breaks up the architecture. It's the first concept that we brought to the market that integrated interior space and neighborhood space. It's a very much of a systems approach, just like everything else that we're introducing. The walk leads to the living area. To get the panoramic views, we have to have a good amount of staggering. That eliminates this alley look. We're using townhome standards for the drives, not alley standards, so they're a little bit wider, a little bit more functional. We can get 2 and 3 car garages easily within these homes, yet have a good sense of density and a good sense of open space. From its introduction in 1999 to the beginning of the recession, they were phenomenally successful, planning tens of thousands of bay homes and developments. Most of the developments had bay homes for its advantages in the marketplace, a systems approach. But then we started thinking, this is so successful, why aren't we doing this for every single unit, multifamily and single family? In the pursuit of density, single family homes become narrow and deep. In other words, less livable. There's several problems. One is that the home itself, once we start analyzing it in Land Mentor software and analyze the spaces, we can see 8% of the home is hallway. $200,000 home means $16,000 of the home is in space that's not livable space, it's not usable space. $16,000 being thrown away in space just to get to room functions within the home. But more seriously, on a grid, this narrow deep home has almost no connection to the street front. It's a door and a garage. When we look at living spaces, they literally look into the bedrooms of the neighbors or right into the other homes just 40 feet away, rear to rear on that grid. So how can we take advantage of the shapes of the lots that we're creating? So we have to look at window space. The perimeter of a narrow deep home allows very little viewable area. In this case, as we analyze the home, if that entire viewable area was glass front and rear, it's only 22% of the homes. But cove lots are not rectangular. By integrating architecture and planning at the initial design stages, we create a plan that enhances livability and value at the most important group, which is the mass housing market. The most affordable units enhancing the living standards of the greater population. The importance of architecture is elevated because it's no longer just a facade and front porch. It goes far beyond that. Of course, the front porch is important for that streetscape, but we start adding functionality that's never been done before. So now let's take a look at that same home on a coved 45-foot wide lot. What we've got is we've introduced full front porches. The garage is no longer the dominant feature. We have panoramic views along most of the homes because of the angle relationships in the inside pie lots. And as we enter the homes, on most of the homes, the space expands. That did not happen before. So we create this extra functionality. On the outside pie, the home's wider in the back. Same benefits. We can introduce panoramic views around the edges, get space to expand where the yard is larger in the back, and we can get this more sense of space as we enter the home. And of course, a wider home is easier to plan without excessive hallway spaces. So now we've got 1/4 of the hallway space, 1/4 of the wasted space that we would have otherwise had to heat and cool. And so less energy use, maximum gain, maximum value. Now, of course, there's a lot more to this new era of design than we're able to show you in just 20 minutes with these little snippets. But essentially, think of it this way. This is the way the streetscape would have looked on those 35-foot wide homes as they were presented. The same density at a similar spot, the view shed that we're providing is this. You're looking at the same density and the same width homes, same minimums. This is the transition that we offer going from conventional design or new urbanism to Prefurbia. Of course, as a single small planning firm, we can't change the world, but we can change the industry. For 3 decades, CAD has been stagnating planning, surveying, engineering. So how can we go beyond CAD? So we've created a system that others can use. The first intelligent spatial technology that comes with a complete education on how to replicate the advantages that we've created. Again, as we alluded in the beginning of this presentation, the entire consulting industry has been shackled into this mindset that we've got to replicate development out the door as fast as possible. The industry itself has forgotten the importance of creating neighborhood. Instead, they create geometry. They create math. We've got a better coordinate geometry. We've got better technology. People don't understand a 2D plan. They can't visualize it, and yet we build the world based on that, and 3D has not been used because it's far too difficult. So we've created the first simple to use and harness 3D virtualization using video gaming technology. So we can take and get a plan out and not just give a 2D plan, but give a video experience free to our customers and have that capability go to any consultant embracing the system. So the question remains, we're available to plan your sites, or will the consulting industry start embracing a new way, investing the time, money, manpower, and energy to learn to do a better job for their clients, the developers, the builders, the municipalities, ultimately the consumers, you living in these neighborhoods. The land plan is the developer's business plan. It's the foundation of the market advantage for the builders that they sell to. One thing for certain, I certainly wouldn't want to be the builder or developer that has to compete against one of these developments down the street. Thanks for your time. Prefurbia, reinventing land development from disdainable to sustainable.